it's time now for some real education. And if you haven't been living under a rock, you've joined us these past days, and we're talking about C.S. Lewis's space trilogy, but more specifically, the third installment of the trilogy, and so it's called That Hideous Strength. Now, take it away, Dr. Duke, with all your wisdom about this novel.
Thank you. That Hideous Strength is the third book, as Katie pointed out, of C.S. Lewis's space trilogy. The story follows the adventures of Dr. Elwin Ransom, who traveled to Mars in Book 1 in Out of the Silent Planet, and then he traveled to Venus in Paralandra in Book 2. In both of those two science fictions, travels, Christianity, this is Christian science fiction, which really puts a neat spin on it. Nothing written like these books before. Unlike the first two novels, That Hideous Strength, which was written in 1945, takes place here on Earth, involving an ostensibly scientific institute called the NICE, the N-I-C-E, which is a front for sinister supernatural forces that want to enslave and globalize the world. The novel was heavily influenced by the writing of Lewis's friends Charles Williams and the Inklings, and it is distinctly dystopian. And so there's a great quote today from this. This is all. How do we've been looking at this all week with That Hideous Strength. This is the fourth of our 5 days spent on this book, and we're taking quotes. And how do you manipulate the media? How do you manipulate journalism? How do you make reality seem very different than it is? Everything that we see that's been going on in the last 4 years, how everything Trump says is immediately filtered through left-wing lenses. It's given a completely different meaning. This is how they can say absurd things like Donald Trump is a Nazi and a white supremacist. Anybody who follows Donald Trump should never be allowed to publish again. Anybody who goes to Harvard University who supported Donald Trump should never be allowed to set foot on campus again. That's how you get here. And in 1945, a good 80 plus years ago, we were learning from C.S. Lewis how the mechanisms of fascism, how the mechanisms of radical communism overturn reality in the name of fake, for lack of a better word, fake news. We've forgotten that, right? Donald Trump swept to power largely on his acknowledgement of what a lot of other people wouldn't acknowledge. There's a lot of fake news coming from the mainstream media. Much of what the mainstream media tells us, much of what our technological overlords let through and what they ban is fake, right? They're letting through fake news when it's liberal news. When it's conservative news, that's the fake news they ban. And so here you have an example from 1945 from the book. Mark is beginning to get the hang of it. He's beginning to realize that there's more going on here than just good left-wing journalism, that this organization, the NICE, is manipulating truth in the name of control. You mean, quote, you mean you've engineered the disturbances? You created the riot, said Mark. To do him justice, to do Mark justice, his mind was reeling from this new revelation. In other words, you create riots, you create things like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and then you immediately confer on them absolute truth. You do not question their motives. You make you see this in 1945. You mean you've engineered the disturbances, said Mark. To do Mark justice, his mind was reeling from this new revelation, nor was he aware of any decision to conceal his state of mind. In the snugness and the intimacy of the circle that he found himself in, his facial muscles and his voice, without any conscious volition, taking on the tone of his colleagues. The more he surrounded himself by this liberal anarchistic group, the more he started to sound like a liberal anarchist, right? It just fit nicely. Quote, "That's a crude way of putting it," said Feverstone. "It makes no difference," said Philostrato. "This is how we manage things. If riots do the trick, we create the riots, and then we report on them in ways that allows our world alone to flourish. It is how things have to be managed." "Quite," said Mrs. Hardcastle. "It's always done. Anyone who knows police work will tell you. And as I say, the real thing, the big riot, must take place within the next 48 hours. One wonders if the big riot is what we're now calling insurrection, what we now pretend is insurrection, right? A situation where after 4 years of radical opposition to the Trump administration, to the Democrat processes that gave us that president, in this so-called insurrective riot at the Capitol. Lots going on in that. Ask yourself the question, to what degree was that manipulated? To what degree was that staged? To what degree was that infiltrated by people who had no antipathy to government, but wanted to see greater government. There's a lot going on here in 1945, and if all you got to do is read the book That Hideous Strength, it shows you the mechanisms through which this happens.